And we are live. Welcome to Crypto Law TV. I'm John Deaton, the founder and today's host. Welcome. We got a special report. We're going to delve into the Inspector General report on the Bill Hinman speech. And we have none other than the folks who led the FOIA litigation against the SEC. Let's bring on Tristan. How you doing, Tristan?
Great. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good. Now, just to put it in context, everyone out there should know that, Bill Hinman gave that speech on June 14th, 2018. In the Ripple litigation, we learned some things. We learned that his law firm was a member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. At the time that he gave that speech, we learned that some other things. Obviously, we're not going to delve into all that. We're going to get into this report. But based on the Ripple litigation, based on some of the things, the fact that he was an ongoing profit-sharing partner type stuff, you all at Empower Oversight, which for everybody watching is a independent, as far as I'm concerned, nonpartisan watchdog that, wants to make sure we have transparency and integrity in government officials. And so you all basically sent some FOIA requests. The SEC was trying to avoid some stuff. You sued them, and lo and behold, you all received lots of emails, and those internal emails, which are all on the Crypto Law site, showed that SEC officials, ethics department, actually warned Bill Hinman several times that said, listen, you got to stop emailing your partners at Simpson Thacher. You got to stop going to dinners with them. It looks bad. It's a conflict of interest. There was business that Simpson Thacher had. For example, on a day that Bill Hinman met with them, his Chinese partner at Simpson Thacher, you had the K9 IPO, which dealt with Ethereum mining, which obviously benefited from the speech. So these SEC folks were saying, SEC ethics folks were saying to Bill Hinman, stop doing that. You're violating the law. You all sued. And tell us what your referral, why you did it, and then we'll get into how hard you fought to get what you got, and then what it ultimately said. Go ahead.
Sure. So I'll say why we did it in two parts, actually. So obviously, for those that were following the litigation and for the information that came out, it looked really bad for the way the SEC had operated, and obviously for the application of the ethics rules to Bill Hinman. For us to make a referral to the Inspector General was twofold. On the one hand, there should have been accountability for Bill Hinman and what he did. That said, he had left the agency. So part of it is, kind of exposing, having the Inspector General make an independent assessment. That's one piece of it. On the other hand, since he'd already left the agency, it's not like he could be disciplined while at the agency. Another piece of it is to just make sure that the SEC's processes are good ones, right? So that's the sort of thing that inspectors general do all the time. They'll say, here's the law, here are the regulations, here are the rules. Let's look at how they were applied inside the agency. And if it didn't go well, maybe the law, is the best law you could write on that, and the regs are the best you could have on that. But if they're not being properly applied inside the agency, what does it matter what's on paper? So that's part of their job, is also to assess the systems and processes and see how those were working in practice. So those were the two motivations for making the referral to the Inspector General. Still a long time ago at this point, right? So it's already been so many years since the speech, but
and listen, people gotta understand, like, I commend outfits like yours, because especially today, the public has lost confidence in our institutions. Let's just be honest, whether it's the DOJ or the SEC or the CFTC, it always seems like there's regulatory capture. I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried was meeting privately, got private meetings with Gary Gensler. It's made no sense why Ripple was sued and XRP was declared a security by the SEC, but every other token wasn't. ETH wasn't. And, there was no real explanation by Bill Hinman when he said, setting aside the fundraising that accompanied the ICO, today it's sufficiently decentralized, but there was no definition of what sufficiently decentralized means. It just didn't look good. And then when you add in the conflicts of interest, and so I commend you for doing it. And it was tooth and nail. Can you just describe, like, the process of just getting your hands on this stuff, on the report itself?
Sure. Well, so most inspectors general don't make their individual reports, their reports on individuals public. If they do reports, and I say this, they're inspectors general at all of the major departments and agencies in the government, right? And frankly, IGs for a number of not so major departments. Agencies. So there's kind of standard processes across the board. Usually, if they do a programmatic review, they'll publish that. They'll put that out there. If they're talking about the actions of one individual, they tend to not put that out there. But so we had pushed for early on to obtain a copy of the report. Hinman was a very senior official at the SEC, right? So it wasn't some low level SEC employee. And so, that's one of the things that mitigates for releasing these kinds of things. So we had made the referral in the course of our one of the ways to try and figure out what the IG was doing, where there is, again, not necessarily a lot of transparency there as it relates to reviews of specific individuals, was to do a new FOIA request asking for their communications about the IG report. That's where we learned that it was underway, that they were conducting a review and that their review was almost done. After that, last summer, I wrote to the SEC Inspector General saying, hey, public has a strong interest in seeing this. You really should release it publicly. We continue to push. We tried to push Congress to get them to release it. So we spent just the vast portion of 2024 and even 2025 pushing, trying to get this report out there, because the public, again, for one, has I think a right to know in general these kinds of things, but especially here where Hinman's actions were so public and frankly led to a lot of loss of confidence in the SEC.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not one of these guys when I make sort of predictions. I've been right about a lot of things. Some things at least. I predicted how the judge would rule in the Ripple case. I said that she would declare XRP not a security, but that didn't mean Ripple wouldn't be fined for some early institutional sales or whatnot, and that's how she ruled. Sometimes I get it wrong, and I'm always going to get up here and tell you when I got it right, and tell you when I got it wrong. I actually was very vocal about this, and I said that a monkey could, as a former federal prosecutor, could get, doesn't mean that anybody goes to jail or anything bad, but that you could find a conflict of interest that violates our rules and our ethics and our conflict laws. And the basis for that was what the SEC ethics office itself was saying to Bill Hinman. And that his emails, when I say his emails, his government SEC emails prove conclusively that after those warnings that you're violating the criminal financial conflict laws of the United States, he meets 3 more times minimally with those individuals. Therefore, your ethics office told you don't do this, and then you do it 3 more times. That's what I meant by a monkey can prove that. Now, what I predicted, Tristan, was I said that the report will come out and it'll say that there was a conflict of interest and that it was sloppy conflict stuff, that the speech should have went to the ethics office. If you look at the emails of everyone who got a copy of that draft speech, interestingly, the only division that's not identified that got a copy on the email distribution is the ethics office. Trading and markets got it. The chairman's office got it. The office of general counsel got it, and other divisions. So I said that the IG would say, yes, there was a conflict of interest. Yes, this was a violation, but there's no evidence of bribery and there's no evidence of quid pro quo. And there's no real, like really egregious stuff. It's just sloppy ethics, conflicts issues. And that here's our recommendation of cleaning that up moving forward. That's what I thought was going to happen. And I got it wrong because the Inspector General, and I'm going to ask you what it says next, and you can tell everyone, didn't find that first part that I thought that she would. It seems that she took a different perspective than the actual SEC ethics folks. So I'm just owning my own prediction like I always do. So tell us what ended up happening. What's the report say?
So it has several different findings.
And when you do that, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to know whether you're surprised or not. Please go ahead.
Sure. So their first finding is of course something that we knew, which is when Hinman was onboarded, he disclosed his financial interest in Simpson Thatcher, and then he took the steps that they required. So that's fine. What you have to do, obviously, is to we knew that he was his compensation otherwise would have shifted from year to year based on Simpson Thatcher's income. That was his compensation agreement. We know that he agreed, okay, I'm going to cap it at this, right? So he received a set amount. So for the time he was there, their change in income didn't impact that. That's fine. We all knew that going in. I think the really big thing here is that his statements regarding Ether. The biggest finding here is they found no evidence that those statements in his Yahoo speech had a direct and predictable effect on his financial interests at the time, or that he made them for personal gain. And I was surprised to an extent by this piece. I will say I wasn't necessarily shocked by this. The ambiguity surrounding these is, did he know for sure that he was going to go back to Simpson Thatcher? Well, it seems he very likely did. That was the whole point of his agreement when he came in. But and the other piece was being a member of the Ethereum Alliance, something that led to increased profits potentially, and that's been kind of the assumed piece. Like, because did Simpson Thatcher have a financial interest in Ethereum, even though they were a member of the Alliance? That's the sort of thing that I thought the Inspector General might get murky on trying to figure out. They did no analysis of that, right? There's no mention in here of the Alliance at all, right? And so they reference it in some different ways, but they don't talk about how that specifically would have an impact. They do say that Hinman claimed he was unaware that Simpson Thatcher had joined the Ethereum Alliance. Take that for what it's worth, right? We don't know one way or the other. So that piece was, again, I knew that was going to be a harder piece. What I also thought was very surprising was even all of his other conflicts, they essentially just considered that kind of de minimis contact. So they said for these other things, for instance, the recruiter, he referred them to another partner. So they said, okay, that's fine. His other miscellaneous contacts is how they put it. They thought all of those things, meeting with his partners, that didn't violate the guidance that he received, even though, as you say, in their own emails, they said you shouldn't be having these meetings. And that, I think, is the weakest part of their report altogether. And it's very short. It just says they didn't preclude him from communicating, but they don't address the meetings or anything else. So
that's what surprised me. Like, it seemed like there was no real true dealing with the internal ethics department and their admonitions to him, where they said, okay, he actually didn't meet them, or he did meet them, but it was about personal business, not to do, to me, again, one of the biggest issues that I thought wasn't really the speech. Like, I mean, the speech is the speech. And I actually predicted, and I got this right, because before the deposition was released, I said Bill Hinman will definitely testify that he didn't know about the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, because if he did, he couldn't do the speech. Like, if you knew about it, then you can't do the speech, because it's a conflict. Because I want everybody to know how conflict should work, which is, we all know the SEC constantly says we're not going to talk about a specific token. How many times have we heard Gary Gensler, even after this Bill Hinman speech, Jay Clayton, Bill Hinman was asked dozens of times, what about XRP? It's the third. Well, we're not going to talk about a specific token. We're not going to talk about a specific token. So very rarely when someone high-ranking official like an SEC member, director of corporation finance, is going to give this market-moving speech that says Bitcoin and Ethereum are not securities, which causes ETH to go up 400%. And conflicts would be, okay, well, Bill, we got to make sure before you say that you don't own any ETH, you don't own any Bitcoin, right? Your family members don't. What about let's talk about your law firm, because you still get paid. Is there any connection to Bitcoin there? Is there any connection to ETH there? Had they done that conflict, say, oh, they're a member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. Bill, you can't do that speech. We can still do the speech, but you just shouldn't do it because it looks bad, right? That's how it's supposed to work, or am I wrong?
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly what they should have done. And part of what they say as a defense is, and what became clear. I mean, you saw this during the case of the Ripple litigation. On the one hand, they said, "Oh no, he's speaking in his personal capacity." Well, at some point, they realized, I guess, that legally didn't help anything. But what we know is behind the scenes, it was constructed by a lot of people. Now, again, having a lot of people involved in writing the Yahoo speech, or at least weighing in on it, might be harmful in some ways. Clearly, it undercuts them saying he did it in his personal capacity. On the other hand, the bottom line for this is this gives the impression that kind of evens out the ethics issue, because you'd say, well, even if he had an interest, all these other people looked at it, and that's the policy that the SEC wanted to pursue. But to your point, yeah, but the public is going to say, he has an interest in this, so find someone else to give the dang speech, right? If that's the policy, right? Don't have someone involved that has an individual financial interest in it, and they clearly.
You're right, and everyone needs to back up. There's another big issue. Jay Clayton met with Chris Dixon at A16Z and said, put together a small working group, right? And go to Bill Hinman, write up a memo. We know that A16Z's crypto lawyer, Lowell Ness, wrote that memo that gave it to Hinman, and they helped write the speech. Lowell Ness says Hinman's speech followed sort of my line of thinking. He says that. Bill Hinman works with the folks today that helped wrote the speech. Like, it looks bad. That's all I'm saying. I'm not disparaging anybody's personality or whatever. That just freaking looks bad, right? These people help you write a speech. Then on top of that, you meet with Ethereum's co-founder, Vitalik Buterin, 6 days before the speech or 4 days before the speech. You change the draft of the speech after that meeting. The first draft before the Vitalik meeting talks about the decentralization of mining, of Ethereum mining, right? Then after that, and it isn't decentralized because back then it was 75% in China. All right. Now that's just a fact. All right. People out there can get mad all you want. I'm giving you facts. And then after meeting Vitalik, that part of the draft speech no longer talks about the decentralization of Ethereum mining, right? Because it's factually not true. And to their credit, they took it out. But then Bill Hinman gets up on TV and says, when I look at ETH, I don't see a third-party promoter. You just met him. You just met him 4 days ago, right before he gave the speech. And so all that stuff just looks bad. And that's what people are sick and tired of in our country. We're tired of this, a few billionaires and a few people get a blessing, right? SBF gets private meetings, but Brian Armstrong doesn't, from Coinbase, where the government, these regulators are connected with these people, and they get the meetings, and then they get the benefits, and the rest of that's not free market capitalism. I'm a free market capitalist, and so I know you are as well. Anyways, I'm not going to sit here and rant, but I wanted to share that. You've been doing this, I guess I was naive, Tristan. I shouldn't be. I'm, 57 years old. I've been a federal prosecutor, but I really was discouraged by it because, even the meeting that Bill Hinman met with his Chinese partner on the K9 thing, the very day a letter from his department issued a letter related to that business before the commission. Like, that's just, that's bad. Like, and they don't even address any of that.
They don't address that. And again, that's the weakest when they say, I'm going to scroll in here on mine. Again, his miscellaneous contacts, right? They say they don't preclude him from communicating with their personnel just to not attend conferences. Like, he met with the guy that was doing this, right? He met in their offices and they sent that letter. And again, the IG doesn't even attempt to address that issue. Now, maybe they missed it, right? I mean, I will say, Inspector General's offices are not perfect. Sometimes they put out not great work, right? But whatever the reasoning is, and again, I will say there are only a handful of IG offices in the whole government that I've ever been all that impressed with, frankly. And the SEC, right. They changed. This is an acting IG, so not shocking in that way. But again, we thought we had teed up enough of these facts that they would at least address, even if they were to rebut even if we thought they incorrectly rebutted the facts that we put in the letter. But they didn't even bother to try to do that.
Right. And that's why I call it a whitewash. Let me ask you, is this Inspector General is it's a she, right?
Yeah.
Is she still acting Inspector General?
I believe she is. There's been a lot of turnover in the IG community right now during the Trump administration. Not a shocking surprise. But their office there has, again, I believe that she is still in place right now.
And the reason I ask that is because if she gets a job at Simpson Thatcher, right, Sullivan Cromwell or A16Z or any of this, connection, then there's no faith ever anymore. And that's what I'm saying. And at this point, I'm not saying that would happen, but I wouldn't even be shocked if that happened, because it seems to just repeat, and it's very discouraging. I mean, I talked about my level of discouragement, but I'm biased, right? Because I was fighting in the XRP case and the Ripple case, and I was actually the very first person to put out those disclosures with the Simpson Thatcher and the 15 million and all that. For a year and a half, I never said Hinman violated a statute because I didn't know. When you uncovered those emails through your litigation at Empower, then I said, yes, he did, and I felt comfortable. I still feel comfortable saying that he did. Doesn't mean, it was like this evil thing. It just means that I believe the statute was violated. But that's my surprise. You do this for, routinely, and you're involved in many other things. This surprise you on any level? Disappoint you on any level? And is this over as far as Empower's involvement with the SEC and the speech and all that? Take all that.
Well, so nothing surprises me, I will say. Sad, but that is the case. I think my first investigation after law school, working with my partner Jason Foster, was into ATF's Operation Fast and Furious, and when firearms that the federal government allows to be trafficked to Mexican drug cartels are used to kill a border patrol agent, then after that everything is like, well, okay, that's the world we live in, right? So, right. I don't think this is the end for Empower. I think there are still other things we can do to follow up. I am remembering as I look online. So there's actually a really interesting article on Bloomberg by Jason Leopold, who does a lot of FOIA work. This is April 11th, 2025. But he writes about how when a lot of inspector generals were being fired, how inside the SEC inspector general's office, kind of all the things they did to try and figure out how it was going to turn out for them. But she is still in place. And it's important to keep in mind that she was appointed by Gary Gensler. So this is not one where the president gets to appoint the inspector general. She's appointed by the agency. Again, I think all of that said, it's this isn't a huge surprise, but there are still other areas. And again, part of my lack of surprise at this IG's findings is because of my congressional oversight, seeing shoddy jobs in the past. And I think that's where this needs to go. I really think Congress needs to get involved. Congress needs to come in and say, hey, IG office, that's fine. They made the conclusions that they did on these issues. Did you look at this other thing? So they have working papers and other things. We have FOIA'd those, and we will continue to pursue our Freedom of Information Act for those working papers. But Congress can get that stuff faster. Congress should come in and say, we want to see, did you look at this meeting with Lynn at all? Did you address the fact that he had this meeting in 2019, the same day as these events happened? So see whether that got covered. Whether it did or not, they should be able to also say, take a look at what other changes there should be in SEC policy. You and I have talked about before how in every office in the federal government, ethics compliance is largely decentralized, right? There's not a great way to know what's happening. So I think I mentioned before, I was they call it the designated agency ethics official. That's the top ethics person at an independent federal agency. And an ongoing discussion was always, well, if someone at our agency goes and disregards this guidance that we give, how much of a difference does it make, right? Is this, in our case, then there weren't likely to be people making money off of things like that. This is an instance, the SEC is an instance clearly where people can make money off of that, right? That's very different from kind of other types of situations where the ethics guidance comes into play. So that Congress should demand that the SEC IG do further reviews of those, because again, this the revolving door as you describe. I guess the third time I'll mention, I think we talked about this before the last time we were on together, right? But you see throughout the government instances where people make decisions that benefit certain communities, and those communities at the end of that person's service, they say, hey, why don't you come work with us? Now that doesn't look great, right? You can see how it happens, and that doesn't mean that the person at the time made the decision specifically thinking, I hope I get a job there, because if they do, that clearly would violate ethics guidance, right? Yep. But do people have thoughts like that? I mean, that's the way that it works all the time, right? That's the revolving door. And so, addressing situations like that in places like the SEC, where so much money is involved, the stakes are so high, I think that's an important step. And the IG should look at it. Congress should look at it. It's something we have to address in this country. But overall, I think there is another whole other front. Congress just needs to step up and do some oversight of this issue.
All right, I got one follow-up question to that. But when I ran for Senate, one of the proposals that I wanted to implement was that there would be a statutory bar of 3 years. It could be 5 years. It could be 18 months. I don't know. Something that prevents you from being the chairman of the FDA on Friday and Monday on the board of Pfizer. Because we've seen that in this country, right? And that was a Republican situation. So this is a nonpartisan issue. Or we see the chairman of the SEC all of a sudden, starts doing blockchain stuff while he was supervising blockchain stuff. It just looks bad. And so I think we need a bar that prevents that. And it's called public service, not self-service. And I think that would be a thing. One last thing on this report, I remember distinctly that Warren Davidson asked the director of enforcement at the time of the SEC, his name is Gruel. He was testifying instead of Gensler, and Warren Davidson said, on the Bill Hinman speech, said to him, did Bill Hinman get the ethics clearance to make this speech? And Gruel said, because it's litigation, I can't comment. And I already mentioned that in the email distribution of who got the draft, you don't see those attorneys who were warning him about the ethics issues on the email distribution. So my question is, and this is to be fair to Mr. Hinman, because if it's in there, then people should know that for his own reputation, benefit, or whatever. Did the SEC Inspector General say, yes, the SEC Ethics Office cleared this speech? They reviewed it, they cleared it, they blessed it, and now Bill, go get it. Because to me, that would be his golden card, right? Like, hey, ethics cleared it. Is there any evidence of that?
Again, they come back to the idea that it was collaborative, that multiple people were involved in drafting the speech. An interesting kind of further issue there is they talk about how there's a unique part of this I want to see. He circulated the speech to OGC. They do talk about that. They talk about how people who draft speeches, they say that they require those to go through the pre-publication review. So, they say they went through with a fine comb. It's not clear. They don't specify in what we have here, whether it went to the ethics official in the general counsel's office, but they do say that it did go to OGC.
Let me ask you this. When I read this IG report, it made it seem like everyone, it was collaborative, like they agreed with him. I know for a fact the Office of General Counsel recommended in an email to Hinman on a draft to not include Ethereum. Right?
Yeah.
Now, now to be fair to anyone watching this, he didn't say don't include it because of a conflict or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that. He said, or the office said, we recommend not including Ethereum because it could limit our options later on what to call Ethereum, right? an example where the regulator wants it vague and opaque for maximum prosecutorial regulation by enforcement policy. In my opinion, that's how I read it. But that seems inconsistent. Like, did the IG, address that the Office of General Counsel said take ETH out or recommend taking ETH out?
No, they don't at all. And again, it would have been helpful if they had identified that, again, whether that actually went to the specific ethics folks. They don't address any of the input on there. They do just say that, they went through it with a fine-tooth comb. One of the things that they highlight here, and this goes to the heart of the conflict of interest, is that even if he, although it was before the commission, they say his statements about Ether weren't a level of personal and substantial participation. This line here is, the attenuated connection. This is kind of the key point of this whole thing. Their key thesis: the attenuated connection between the Yahoo speech, the status of the Ether token as security, the Ethereum Alliance, and Simpson Thatcher Bartlett's participation in the Ethereum Alliance and industry network taken together do not amount to a direct and predictable financial benefit. Again, there's an element of this that just there are unknowns in each of those boxes. Did Hinman really know that they were a member of the Ethereum Alliance? He says no. They don't know any different, right? So that's kind of this blank, this variable in the equation. So they say, well, there's too many question marks for us to say that it had a direct and predictable effect. That said, does that mean that he couldn't have known? Does that mean, no, it does not rule that out. It is quite possible, right, that he knew exactly what their involvement was with Ethereum, that even though there were other people going along, it is quite possible that he, was very happy that they were happy to support his agenda, and something that he, together with Jay Clayton, had been pushing, so this doesn't, all this says is we can't make a case. It doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Sure. And this is what people are sick and tired of. I've never suggested, and you've addressed this already earlier, I've never suggested that there was like bribery or like, say this and you get to, I don't think that. But do I think that someone might say at a hedge fund or some entity, a company, it's been great working with you. If you ever are going to leave public service, we're always looking for someone to lead our policy down the road. Do I think conversations like that happen at lunch? Absolutely. And that's the point of making sure that we have, public's confidence in ethics review. It's very simple. I want to give this speech. This is what I'm going to say. You give it to an ethics person, and if they give you permission to do it, then you do it. And so I always said from the very beginning, just say that the ethics people blessed it, because you have to. It's not every day that an SEC senior person gets up and highlights a specific project, giving it a regulatory advantage over competitors. That does not happen very often. So when you take a step like that, where you are giving a distinct regulatory advantage to one project, we just want to make sure that there's no connections to it. There's no personal connection to it. And it's just because of these objective reasons. It's not that difficult to follow, in my opinion.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I think that's the challenge, is, again, for them to say that Hinman complied with the ethics requirements because he sent it to OGC for review. Again, the process question is that enough? Is there a requirement that every speech that ethics officials in OGC are informed? Because this report doesn't tell us that. This report doesn't tell us the money question above all else. It just doesn't answer that. And again, if that's something that the SEC's processes need to change to say that, again, people, to your earlier point, I am somewhat sympathetic. I don't know what the answer would be, but to the idea that, the people that so frequently are tapped to be the SEC commissioner or work there, the FDA folks, they're people that have worked in the industry, right? So I get that, right? And when they're done, are they supposed to go do what if it's totally unrelated to what they do, right? That's a fair question. Okay, I've worked in this whole industry now. You want me to go like operate an orphanage, right? So okay, fine. But on the other hand, again, if that's the world that we live in, then you have to have a scenario where ethics has eyes on all of these things. And so the SEC's processes might need to change to make sure that every single thing is routed through them. And that's the review that this IG office should have done, and they didn't.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, up until 2019, the SEC had no policy on whether or not Bill Hinman or Jay Clayton or Hester Peirce or, an enforcement officer could own digital assets. So you could have owned digital assets at the time, and there'd be no policy against it. So listen, I just want to thank you, commend your outfit. I think people need to support outfits like yours. I know that you do so many more things other than the SEC thing. I know that people watching this, especially, who were invested in this Ripple case and all the drama that went down, people have a real connection to it, and they're going to be frustrated. Are you going to try to put any pressure on Congress or members of Congress using this as an example of what needs to be done, or what?
Yeah, I think this is a really good example of where, one of the things that you see, right? Again, a nerd like me says, well, you need to have oversight across the board. For most people, it sounds really abstract. Like, what does oversight even mean, right? The public responds when you see specific facts, specific stories, right? So this is a story that staff, members of Congress can understand. You look at it and you're like, oh yeah, that doesn't look good, right? So we definitely want to do that. Maybe it ends up being Democrats in Congress who, with a Republican in the White House, I mean, this happened during the Trump administration. Maybe it's Democrats in Congress that say, now that it's politically advantageous to them, that they say, oh, suddenly we're interested in this issue. That's fine. That's fine. I don't care who it is. This is an issue that, again, doesn't matter who you are. Every person in America should care about this kind of thing. So we will be trying to follow up with Congress. And I hope we'll find those takers. I hope we'll find people that will say, you know what, whatever political ramifications this have are not so important as just bread and butter good government here. That's what we want to focus on. So I hope we'll be able to get them to do that.
All right. Final question, Tristan. Anything you working on that you want to highlight that you think people that should be interested or watching, or you want to plug anything or anything? The floor is yours, and after you're done, we'll call it a day. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure being here. I will say this. We have been, Jason and I and the folks at Empower, we're a very small outfit, so the folks includes only a couple of other people, but because it's been known from the outset that we're in this for the good government angle, right? We've said in a few public settings, I don't own any cryptocurrency, Jason doesn't, and frankly, after learning about cryptocurrency more through all of this, right, I would have held off just because, again, I didn't want someone to say, well, you're just doing this because you have financial interest. We are on the cusp of making a change so that we could accept digital currency donations. Again, we've held off on that because while we're doing this work, we don't want anyone to feel like exactly what we're talking about. Oh, I need to give, so they'll have an obligation to do X, Y, or Z. But we think transparency is important. And so again, as we do reach a stage where maybe this work is going to be in the rearview mirror for us, any support we'd appreciate. There is right now a whistleblower we're working with on some human trafficking matters. We have multiple different whistleblowers. I just filed an 80-page brief on Wednesday night, and by Wednesday I mean at one in the morning, but for a Secret Service whistleblower, right? So there are good people all throughout government that are trying to raise the problems. We're going to support those folks, but this human trafficking one that is coming down the pike is really, really disturbing. So yeah, if people go to empoweroversight.org, they can see the new things we're working on and see the progress there. And we hope people will continue to care, again, outside of the one issue that impacts them, because all of these issues impact us, right? Again, even if I'm not a crypto investor or an investor in another thing, bad government at the SEC impacts me the same as bad decisions at the U.S. Department of Agriculture or unethical things. Bad government is bad government, even if my farm isn't being impacted or my business in this area or whatever else. All of us should care about having good government that serves we the people.
Yeah, and I'll say there should be no issue of Empower Oversight accepting crypto for donations. It's a bipartisan type thing because the president of the United States, when he was running, Donald J. Trump, accepted crypto for donations, as did John Deaton when he ran, but so did Kamala Harris. I know that Kamala Harris got millions of XRP. Donald Trump got millions of XRP and Bitcoin. So, that shouldn't dissuade you at all. I want to see your work funded. You're doing incredible work, not just with this, but with these whistleblowers and protecting them and making sure they have a voice That's outstanding work. Thank you. I'm sure our paths will cross soon, hopefully. Have a great one, brother.
Thanks so much, my friend. Take care.
See you next time, everybody out there. Have a great day.